A man is found dead, shot in the back of the head, his body staged between two parked cars. A pistol on his chest. A plastic sheet beneath him. And not a single sign of struggle. He wasn't robbed. He didn't fight back. And the woman arrested? Wasn't just his wife. She had moved out. Her sister had moved in. 5 days before the murder, a cryptic Facebook post warned, "Even your own blood will wear your shoes while you're still walking in them." What police uncovered after that would divide an entire family and spark one of the most emotionally devastating betrayals we've ever covered. This case doesn't start with a murder. It starts with a home that should have been safe, until 3 people decided to play a dangerous game. On the morning of June 12, 2019, a 911 call was placed by an elderly woman from a residential street off East Beltline Road in Cedar Hill, Texas. She told the dispatcher that her son's car was in the driveway, but he wasn't answering his phone, and she had found blood inside his house. The call was placed at 6:42 a.m. Officers from the Cedar Hill Police Department responded within minutes. According to the incident report, the caller was identified as 72-year-old Patrice Colton, mother of Devin Colton, a 39-year-old DART rail engineer. She told officers she had arrived that morning to spend time with her grandchildren before school, but the children were not at home. She entered the residence using her spare key and immediately noticed blood pooled beside the bed in the master bedroom. The bed sheets were missing, and Devin was nowhere in sight. A perimeter search of the property led officers to the back of the house, where 2 cars were parked in the gravel-lined side driveway. Between them, lying motionless, was a man's body. The man was face up, positioned unnaturally on top of a clear plastic sheet, with a handgun placed flat on his chest. Officers noted no immediate signs of a struggle in the area around the body. No shattered glass, no overturned trash bins, no drag marks across the visible terrain. Just the stillness of the scene, and the unmistakable stench of blood in the early heat. Paramedics arrived at 6:58 a.m. and pronounced the man dead at the scene. He was identified on site as Devin Colton, based on photo ID in his wallet and positive confirmation from his mother. Initial observation noted a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, with no defensive wounds visible on his hands or forearms. His clothing was intact. His phone was later recovered from the kitchen counter inside the home. From the outset, investigators raised concerns about the staging of the scene. One of the responding officers reported to dispatch that the scene did not look right, specifically pointing out the placement of the weapon, the lack of visible blood splatter around the body, and the presence of the plastic sheet, which was tucked precisely beneath the victim's torso but not extended beyond the space between the 2 cars. A search warrant was quickly secured for the property. Crime scene units arrived to process both the interior of the house and the exterior where the body was located. The immediate priority was determining whether the murder occurred on the spot or whether Devin had been killed elsewhere and moved post-mortem. As investigators began photographing and preserving the scene, attention turned to the unusual quiet in the household. No children were present. No one else appeared to be inside. The question now shifted from who killed Devin Colton to where he was actually murdered, and why someone went to such lengths to make it look like he had taken his own life. The answers wouldn't come from the crime scene alone. They would begin to unfold through blood traces in the bedroom, a missing bedsheet, and a quiet Facebook post made 5 days earlier that no one had paid attention to, until now. At the time of his death, Devin Colton had worked for over 15 years as a commuter rail engineer with Dallas Area Rapid Transit, DART. His personnel file described him as punctual, low conflict, and willing to cover shifts others often avoided. Supervisors noted that he had completed multiple safety certifications and had no history of complaints or disciplinary action. According to internal records, he had never once called out without notice. Colton was 39 years old. He had lived most of his adult life in Cedar Hill, a quiet suburban city southwest of Dallas. Public records list him as the owner of the single-story home where his body was found. He had purchased the property nearly a decade earlier after marrying Matilda Colton, who had taken his last name. The two had 3 children together, the oldest being 14 at the time of his death. According to multiple neighbors, Devin was often seen walking his youngest daughter to the bus stop, running errands with his son, or mowing his own lawn on weekends. Residents described him as quiet but approachable. One longtime neighbor told investigators that Devin kept to himself, but you could tell his family meant everything to him. What stood out most in the interviews conducted after his death was the level of involvement Devin had in his children's lives. Several accounts emphasized his role in supporting his eldest child, a teenage boy on the autism spectrum. Teachers at the boys' school described Devin as consistent and cooperative, showing up for meetings and engaging with staff regularly. Special education staff confirmed that he personally coordinated transportation and learning support, rarely missing an update or check-in. Financial records obtained during the investigation confirmed that Devin was the sole income provider at the time of his death. Despite being separated from his wife for several months, he continued to cover mortgage payments, utility bills, and medical expenses for the children. His DART payroll indicated regular overtime, suggesting he was working beyond his assigned shifts to meet the household needs. Interviews with his co-workers revealed a man who didn't talk much about his private life, but who was known to quietly lend help when needed. One supervisor described him as the kind of guy who just shows up, does the job, no fuss, no drama. Another said Devin had once driven 2 hours after a storm to check on a colleague whose power had gone out. He didn't tell anyone, until the colleague mentioned it in a safety briefing 2 years later. Public tributes began to appear within 48 hours of his death. A GoFundMe page created by a cousin had raised over $18,000 within 3 days, intended to support the children he left behind. As the investigation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Devin's death wasn't just the loss of a man, it was the collapse of a structure his entire family had depended on. The crime scene may have raised questions about how he died. But everything investigators learned about Devin Colton in those first few days answered something else entirely: why so many people cared that he was gone. By the end of 2018, changes in the Colton household had become increasingly visible to those closest to the family. According to statements given by extended relatives and a few longtime neighbors, Matilda Colton, Devin's wife of nearly 11 years, had begun spending more time away from the home. While no public arguments or police calls were recorded at the address, it was noted that her vehicle was often absent overnight, and she eventually stopped attending family events hosted at the house. In January 2019, Matilda officially moved out of the residence, though no legal filing for divorce or formal custody had yet been initiated. The move was confirmed by both property records and interviews with a cousin she temporarily stayed with. The separation was never publicly discussed by either party, and friends described it as quiet but definite. Despite leaving the home, Matilda remained actively involved in her children's lives. Witness accounts describe her as someone who continued to attend school functions, church activities, and scheduled visits with the children at the house. Devin reportedly allowed her full access to the kids without restriction. Investigators later found no signs of any custody dispute, financial withholding, or interference from either parent. Matilda, according to a family source, had not secured consistent employment since leaving the home. The lack of formal closure, no legal divorce, no defined boundaries, created a dynamic that was difficult to label. To the outside world, the Coltons appeared to be in a holding pattern. But internally, unresolved emotional undercurrents had already begun shifting the structure of the family. In February 2019, Roughly 1 month after Matilda Colton had moved out of the family home, her younger sister, Trina Johnson, moved in. According to family interviews and records reviewed by investigators, Trina had recently ended a volatile relationship and was in need of temporary housing. She had no formal lease, no stable employment, and no children of her own. At the time, her relocation to the Colton residence was not considered unusual. Trina had a long history of relying on Matilda for support. Following the death of their mother years earlier, Matilda had stepped into a caregiver role, helping Trina through college applications, paying part of her rent during a failed out-of-state move, and assisting with medical bills after a minor surgery. Several family members described their bond as close, with Matilda often referring to Trina as a second daughter, despite being only 5 years older. Devin Colton's decision to allow Trina into the home was understood by relatives as a continuation of that support. At the time, he was managing the household and the children alone, working full-time shifts at DART while balancing parenting responsibilities. Trina's presence was framed as a practical solution, someone familiar to the kids, trusted by the family, and available to help with school pickups, meals, and errands. No formal arrangement or written agreement was made. Neighbors recalled seeing Trina frequently in and around the property in the weeks following her move-in. Some described her as quiet and respectful. Others noted she had begun accompanying Devin on store runs and was sometimes seen outside with the children. To the public eye, the living arrangement appeared cooperative, an extended family member stepping in to help during a transition period. But over time, subtle shifts began to emerge. According to one neighbor, Trina started wearing clothing that appeared to belong to Matilda, including a branded sweatshirt previously seen in holiday photos. Matilda, according to records, was still visiting the home regularly to see her children. But during those visits, she reportedly began to limit her time inside the house. One family member claimed she started picking the children up from the driveway instead of coming in, and would occasionally wait in the car while they gathered their things. There were no formal confrontations at this point. No recorded arguments. No legal restrictions. But what had started as a temporary solution was evolving into a living dynamic with blurred boundaries and shifting roles. Trina Johnson had entered the household under the pretext of support, but as weeks turned into months, her position within the Colton home, and within the family structure, began to change. At some point in early May 2019, Matilda Colton received a quiet warning, one that, according to later interviews, she did not act on. The source was Lois Jenkins, a longtime member of Matilda's church and someone who had known the Colton family for over a decade. Lois was not a close friend, but she had seen enough over the years to notice when something wasn't right. She had attended family events, volunteered with Matilda during women's group meetings, and occasionally assisted with transportation for Matilda's children when needed. According to statements later given to police, Lois had observed Trina Johnson's behavior during 2 church functions, one in April and one in early May. At both, Trina had shown up without Matilda, but with Devin and the children. She stayed close to Devin throughout, helped organize snacks for the kids, and referred to the household casually as home. What unsettled Lois most was the way other members had begun assuming Trina and Devin were a couple. During one event, someone reportedly complimented Devin on his wife's dress, referring to Trina. Devin, according to Lois, said nothing to correct it. Following that interaction, Lois pulled Matilda aside during a midweek Bible study and shared what she'd seen. She told her, quietly and without accusation, that Trina's behavior had shifted. She urged her to pay attention, not to rumors, but to patterns. "Something doesn't sit right," she reportedly said. Matilda's response was consistent with what others described in similar moments: calm, polite, and dismissive. She reportedly replied, "That's my sister. She would never." She did not appear angry, but she made it clear she didn't wish to entertain the subject further. The matter was dropped. Lois did not repeat the warning. But weeks later, when news of Devon's death spread through the church, and Trina's name appeared in press mentions as part of the ongoing investigation, Lois came forward. She shared her concerns with detectives during a voluntary interview, expressing regret that she hadn't pressed harder. Matilda's reaction was not uncommon. In cases involving betrayal within families, psychologists and investigators have often pointed to relational blind spots, moments where trust overrides instinct, where shared history blurs red flags. In Matilda's case, the idea that her younger sister might be involved with her estranged husband may have seemed not only painful, but unthinkable. By this point in time, there were no formal reports, no documented complaints, and no confirmed altercations. From the outside, the family still appeared functional, if strained. But within trusted circles, concern had started to surface. According to phone records reviewed during the investigation, Devon Colton contacted Matilda Colton by voice call on the evening of June 6, 2019, 6 days before his death. The call lasted just under 8 minutes. It was one of only 2 direct communications between them that month, and the last one before the murder. Investigators later learned through interviews with Matilda's cousin and one longtime friend that Devon had raised the possibility of reconciliation during that call. While the conversation wasn't recorded, both individuals stated that Matilda described it afterward as unexpected and soft in tone. She told them that Devon had not apologized outright, but had asked about resetting things for the kids and possibly talking in person. There was no confirmation of what led Devon to reach out. Detectives reviewing his text history found no prior discussion with Trina that indicated tension, and no complaints filed by Matilda that would have prompted a legal conversation. Some close to the family speculated that guilt or second thoughts may have played a role, especially with Devon seeing Matilda less frequently and Trina more often taking her place in the children's lives. A neighbor interviewed by police recalled seeing Devon and Matilda standing near her vehicle outside the house on June 8, just 2 days after the phone call. The interaction appeared calm. There was no argument. The neighbor described it as unusually cordial, especially compared to how distant they had seemed in previous weeks. Whether Devon was sincere about reconciliation or simply attempting to maintain peace is unknown. He left behind no written explanation. However, the timing of the call and the following in-person interaction were considered significant by investigators, particularly in contrast to what would unfold just 4 days later. At the time of this outreach, Matilda had no knowledge of Trina's pregnancy. That detail would not surface until after Devon's death, when Trina confirmed it during a post-incident interview. The timing introduced new layers of emotional complexity and potential motive. If Devon had been unaware of the pregnancy himself, or had not disclosed it to Matilda, it raised questions about what exactly he intended by re-engaging with his estranged wife. For Matilda, the call appeared to reignite a sense of possibility. According to her cousin, she returned home after the brief driveway meeting and said, "Maybe this chapter isn't over yet." There was no indication of instability, confrontation, or distress in the days that followed. No one close to her reported any warning signs. But from an investigative standpoint, the juxtaposition of hope and betrayal stood out. In the timeline of events leading up to the murder, Devon's phone call marked a rare moment of reconnection, one that, in the context of what followed, only deepened the tragedy. In a matter of days, any conversation about second chances would be replaced by forensic analysis, police interviews, and an unanswered question: what exactly changed between that call and the morning Devon Colton was found dead? On June 7, 2019, 5 days before the murder of Devon Colton, a brief post appeared on the personal Facebook page of his estranged wife, Matilda Colton. The post contained no image, no direct name, and no follow-up comments. Even your own blood will wear your shoes while you're still walking in them. The post remained public for less than an hour before it was deleted, but not before it was seen, and later recalled, by at least 3 individuals close to Matilda. During post-incident interviews with police, 2 family friends and 1 former coworker mentioned the post without being prompted. Each described it as unlike her, personal, and concerning. Investigators later retrieved a cached version of the post during forensic review of her Facebook activity. While no threats or direct accusations were made, the statement would become a focal point of psychological profiling as the case progressed. The wording raised several flags. First, the reference to your own blood suggested a familial betrayal, while the metaphor of someone wearing your shoes while you're still alive implied replacement, intrusion, or violation of identity. Given what would later be uncovered about Trina Johnson's relationship with Devon and her growing presence in the Colton home, the phrasing took on a darker meaning in hindsight. At the time, however, there was no immediate alarm. No one reported the post. There was no outreach from family members or intervention from church leadership. For those who saw it, it was simply chalked up to stress, frustration, or vague emotional venting. It wasn't until after Devon's murder that the words were reviewed again, this time not as commentary, but as potential foreshadowing. On the morning of June 12, 2019, Devon Colton was seen arriving at his home on East Beltline Road at approximately 6:10 a.m. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's front-facing doorbell camera captured his vehicle pulling into the driveway earlier than usual. According to his work schedule provided by DART, Devon was not due on shift until 9 a.m., making his early return to the property unusual. In the weeks leading up to the incident, Devon had maintained a routine pattern of coming and going between 7:30 and 8 a.m. This departure from habit was one of the first red flags noted by detectives reviewing the timeline. Based on investigative findings, it's believed Devon entered the house through the front door. There were no signs of forced entry, no security alarms triggered, and no damage to locks. His phone was later recovered from the kitchen counter, and its activity log showed no outgoing messages or calls after 6:12 a.m. What happened inside the home over the next 30 minutes has been reconstructed through forensic evidence, Trina Johnson's post-incident interview, and material findings from the scene. According to a statement Trina gave during her second police interview, she and Devon had spoken that morning about her pregnancy. She told investigators she had confirmed it the week prior but had not yet informed Matilda. During questioning, she claimed the conversation was calm and that Devon had not reacted negatively. Detectives noted inconsistencies in her account but withheld further conclusions pending physical evidence review. Trina did not mention Matilda being present in the home during that exchange. However, cell phone location data and time-stamped doorbell footage placed Matilda Colton's vehicle in the area at approximately 6:27 a.m. While her car is not seen pulling into the driveway, license plate recognition from a traffic camera 3 blocks away confirms her presence heading toward the residence. It remains unclear whether she entered the home or waited nearby, but her proximity during the time of the murder was a critical detail in establishing a working theory. Inside the house, blood was later discovered on the mattress and lower bed frame in the master bedroom. The volume and placement of the blood indicated that Devon had been shot while seated or reclined on the edge of the bed, facing away from the direction of entry. The bullet trajectory confirmed the shot came from behind and slightly above, consistent with someone standing near the bedroom doorway or behind him. The bed sheets were missing and drag marks, partially visible on the hardwood floor, led investigators to the rear exit of the home. A clear plastic sheet found under Devon's body matched a torn roll discovered in a utility closet adjacent to the back door. Devon's body was later found between 2 parked cars in the rear driveway, laid flat atop the plastic. A .38 caliber revolver was placed on his chest, but no fingerprints were recovered from the weapon. The wound placement, lack of gunshot residue on Devon's hands, and absence of a downward firing angle eliminated the possibility of self-infliction. The timeline between his entry and the 911 call made by his mother at 6:42 a.m. narrowed the window of the murder to roughly 15 to 20 minutes. At the time of the call, no one else was present at the house. Trina's location was later verified through her phone's GPS pinging 2 miles away at a retail gas station at 6:46 a.m., though how and when she left the property remains unconfirmed. Matilda was later located at her cousin's residence, having arrived there just before 7 a.m., according to sworn statements and doorbell timestamps. While questions remained about who fired the shot, what happened that morning inside the Colton home was no longer speculative. The forensic trail told a consistent story. Devon had entered alive, been killed in the bedroom, and his body was intentionally staged outside within a matter of minutes. Investigators then turned to the timeline and known movements of individuals connected to the house. Surveillance footage, location pings, and witness accounts confirmed that Matilda Colton had been in the immediate area within the 20-minute window between Devon's last known activity and the 911 call. Her phone's GPS placed her near the residence, and traffic camera footage captured her vehicle turning into the neighborhood shortly before the estimated time of death. A search warrant executed on Matilda's cousin's home, where she was staying, uncovered a black tote bag containing a towel stained with what appeared to be diluted blood. Forensic testing later confirmed the blood matched Devon's DNA. Investigators also retrieved a pair of gloves and a small bottle of industrial-strength surface cleaner from the trunk of her car. While not definitively incriminating on their own, the presence of these items, combined with physical evidence from the home, built a chain of circumstantial indicators. At this point, the murder was no longer under question. The method, movement, and manipulation of the scene had been clearly laid out. What remained was to confirm intent and identify who had the motive, the proximity, and the opportunity to carry out a staged killing inside a home once shared by 3 people, each with overlapping roles, blurred loyalties, and secrets no longer hidden. On June 13, 2019, less than 48 hours after Devon Colton's body was discovered, police executed an arrest warrant for Matilda Colton. She was taken into custody at her cousin's home without incident, but officers noted her emotional state to be unresponsive and physically withdrawn. During the search of her belongings, detectives recovered a small box containing 4 empty pill packs, an open Bible with a folded handwritten note tucked inside the Book of Ecclesiastes, and a disposable razor blade sealed in tissue. The note, later reviewed during the charging process, was not addressed to anyone by name but contained fragmented phrases that read, "I don't know how to come back from this. I was never enough, and if there's mercy, let it not fall on me." EMS on site reported that Matilda had exhibited signs of mild overdose, including disorientation and low heart rate. She was transported for overnight observation under police guard, then booked into the Dallas County Jail the following morning on charges of first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with physical evidence. Simultaneously, Child Protective Services intervened to evaluate the welfare of the 3 Colton children. All were under the age of 16 at the time, including the oldest, a 14-year-old boy diagnosed with autism who had reportedly been the closest to his father. Matilda's parental rights were suspended pending trial, and emergency custody was granted to Devon's elderly mother, who had made the original 911 call the morning Devon was found. She had only come to the house that day to drop off groceries and check on the children before their summer tutoring session. Instead, she walked into silence, an unmade bed, a missing sheet, and a back door ajar. The trauma of finding her son's home empty and sensing something was wrong led her to dial 911, setting into motion the unraveling of a family she once considered functional, even if fractured. In court records filed weeks after the arrest, Matilda's defense cited emotional breakdown, betrayal, and compromised judgment brought on by ongoing familial trauma. The prosecution focused instead on deliberate planning, the attempt to stage a suicide, and the psychological manipulation of a shared household to conceal romantic and territorial conflicts that had long been simmering behind closed doors. Trina Johnson, though heavily scrutinized, was never criminally charged. Her cooperation during questioning, confirmed alibi after the murder, and lack of direct physical evidence kept her outside the formal scope of prosecution. However, she quietly moved out of state 2 months later, after community backlash and online outrage grew in intensity. Her pregnancy was never publicly confirmed nor denied in court proceedings. The final image that lingered for many who followed the case was not the plastic sheet or the staged pistol, but the silence of the children. 3 young lives, left without a father, distanced from their mother, and cut off from the home they once knew. The youngest child reportedly asked his grandmother at one point if his dad was coming back after the news people leave. No one answered. In the end, the story of Devon, Matilda, and Trina was not just about jealousy or betrayal. It was about how the closest bonds, marriage, sisterhood, and motherhood, can fracture so violently that no one is left whole. A family dismantled not in a single moment, but piece by piece, until all that remained were questions, grief, and children left to carry the cost.